Greetings, fellow humans. I am not your leader. However, I am here to introduce the lovely Matt, who has come all the way from Australia to join us today, so I think we should feel very lucky. I originally met Matt in the United States a couple of years ago. I went to a talk of his at another Agile conference, and I thought, man, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. So I thought, since he's Australian, even though I know we're supposed not to like them, he seemed pretty nice. So I invited him over to our conference. He came along last year to the conference in Auckland, and he has come along this year along with his partner Mia, who is at the front there taking photos, to present to us. And today he's going to be talking about child psychology and what we can learn from child psychology to help teams. Matthew is an enterprise agile coach. He applies techniques from his background in psychology and 20 years of UX product development to help organizations become agile. His expertise is particularly sought after to tackle the issues of culture and change at scale, to create high-performing agile teams in both software and non-software environments. He's a firm believer in the use of chocolate at Scrum key meetings and a few drinks with the team after retrospectives. So if you want chocolate and beer, seek out Matt. He is your man. So please welcome Matt.
Thank you, Jacob. Good morning, and thank you very much for spending time with me over the next 40 minutes. I'm going to talk to you about psychological safety. That's me, and my Twitter handle if you'd like to tweet. This is already on our blog. I've made a few adjustments in this version, and I'll be updating that a little bit later today. So let's start. First of all, I need to say that, give this lovely disclaimer. The circle of security, some of the things I'm going to talk about, is not my stuff. It belongs to someone else. And what I'm going to talk about is based on my personal opinion and experience. So don't go quoting me about this is circle of security, but certainly if you've got an opportunity to go to circle of security course, I thoroughly recommend it. Please, come in. Have a seat. A few stragglers. I'd like to introduce you to Inara. It's my daughter Inara. She's now 8. About 2 years ago, Inara and I went through a very, very difficult incident in our lives, in a family. And she went from this bubbly 8-year-old into someone who I would take to school normally, and she'd be really excited. But after this incident, she came up and she would hold on to my leg and say, "Daddy, please don't go." She would cry. She would go and hide in the house and not want to be touched. She wouldn't want to be talked to. She wouldn't want to sit down and talk things about them with me. That was how it affected her, and for me, I suffered from clinical depression as a result. So I not only needed to help myself, but also needed to work out how I would support Inara, my daughter, through this terrible experience. Someone suggested to me that I go to a course called Circle of Security. It's based on attachment theory, about the dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, short and long term, between people. And it provides a framework in order to understand and observe things in the environment and work out how to respond, particularly when people perceive a threat. And this is what it looks like. Very, very simple. Start off with a secure base. Person goes out, explores the world, and when things start to get a little bit concerning, a little bit scary, then there are a few signals that they provide which indicate that they want to come back. And the phrase is to fill their cup, fill their emotional cup, come to that safe haven so that they can then, once it feels safe and secure again, to go out and explore the world. And there's a few different ways that this might manifest. It might be that someone goes out and then spends a whole bunch of time exploring and then comes back. Or these could be micro-interactions where someone is doing something and then stops and looks back at you to go, just to kind of check in visually to go, is everything okay? Get some of that eye contact in order to then go around and play. And we see that in really, really small children, up to 1 or 2 years of age, where they're sitting in a stroller and looking around the world and exploring with their eyes and then go, oh, I see something scary, and then check back in with their parents. Or like Jacob described, when it's like, oh, I'm going to jump. And so I'll try to jump and I'll fall over, etc. And when I hurt myself, well, I need someone who can fill my cup and make me feel safe again in order to go out and explore jumping again. Now, I didn't go to this course alone. I took my friend Mia and I went, hang on, this kind of coming and going, of going out exploring, coming back. I think I've seen that in the workplace. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, there's this guy, Tim, who's a Scrum Master in one of our teams. This was one of 12 teams that we had at scale. And you know, he's at your desk every single morning. In fact, sometimes he's there 3 or 4 times a day. And then after he's kind of had that interaction, he then goes out and helps to support his team. And when things are, you know, not going so okay, then he comes back in to have his cup filled. Because Mia could provide him with that safe haven. I went, oh wow, that's also really interesting, because I've also seen this in one of our other Scrum Masters. Now he has a better time with his team, but he says things like, oh, like I've done this really great, amazing thing, can you come with me and see what I've done? In fact, this guy, Josh, his team had really, really bad automated testing frameworks, and so he built one from scratch. He was a tester by trade before, and then now he's a Scrum Master. He wanted to make ways to help his team. So he went and explored, but importantly, he was like, oh, come with me and see this. Or when he'd done something, oh, come and watch what I've done. So Mira and I were talking about some of that comings and goings and the interactions, etc. And I said, well, what is it that you do that might be different from me in relation to those points of checking in or out? So I'd like you to do this. Find the person next to you, and I want you the first person to spend 60 seconds relating to the other person. I want you to relate how you've been, how are you at this point in the day. I want you to let that person know what your hopes are for this session. And importantly, is there a part of you that doesn't want to be here? And if there is a part of that, well, what is that part of you? And what would it take for that part of you to actually come along and be present? So for me, for example, I'm thinking about my daughter back at home and some of the lovely things that I've experienced in New Zealand. So I did the Dry Creek walk, where you actually get your feet wet as you go all the way up. Hands up if you've done that walk before. Some of you, did you get your feet really, really wet? And it was awesome. I went all the way up and got my feet saturated and came all the way back. Awesome. And I was thinking, oh, I'd really love for Inara to be there with me. So today at the conference, I'm feeling that she's not here, and that's the part of me that doesn't want to be here. So I'm going to give you a 60-second time box, and at the end of 60 seconds, stop and then swap. And if you're seated kind of a little bit too far away from someone, go a little bit closer. So your 60 seconds starts now. Okay, that's your time box. Swap over. So how did that make you feel? Sorry? Made you feel loved. Alex, how did that make you feel?
It energized me for the rest of the day.
Energized you. Oh, is that lovely? Was there someone who had a part of them that kind of wanted to be elsewhere? Yeah? How did it make you feel to actually be able to actually give voice to that? Sorry? Less guilty? What else? A little bit embarrassed? Yeah? Because I made you do it? Oh, I'm sorry. This is all about empathy. And what we noticed in those really early parts of someone coming in and having a conversation was that we provided quite a unique opportunity for these Scrum Masters that we were working with. That suddenly we were able to recognise for them that these are people. And equally as important as going out and being a Scrum Master, well, they're people too, and they deal with really difficult problems. It gave them permission to actually talk about and give voice to things that might have maybe never ever got spoken. Gave them equal voice. And importantly, it gave them permissions to actually voice the threats that they were seeing in their environments. For Tim, these threats limited his team's ability and his ability to support them, to go out and explore and learn. And these cycles of in and out actually supported him and gave him psychological safety. So what is this thing we call psychological safety? I know that Google's written about it and a bunch of other people, so rather than me tell you, I thought, well, we'd hear it from the person who coined the term in the first place.
I call these special workplaces ones that have psychological safety. Now, I'll define psychological safety as a belief that it's absolutely okay to speak up with concerns, with questions, with ideas, with mistakes, the need for coordination, the need for teamwork on the fly, for speaking up, for double checking. In a kind of blinding flash of the obvious, I thought maybe the better teams, maybe they're more willing to discuss them. What if the better teams have a climate of openness that allows them to report and even get to the bottom of these things?
So for Amy, she says that to create psychological safety, think of it more as framing learning as a problem, not work as an execution problem. So we're not here to solve problems, we're here to learn. And as a leader, your responsibility being to create this, in order to create this environment, model that learning and model that curiosity. Now, I think that's kind of easier said than done. Her TEDx talk, if you haven't seen it, there's only a very brief excerpt. Go and watch it. It's awesome. But I came away thinking, well, all right, it's great to say that in 5 minutes. How do I actually action it? How can I be active? And so that's when I started to think about, well, what is it about the circle of security that creates security in children? What is it from attachment theory we can learn and apply to our teams in a very active way? So the first part is the secure base. That's where everything starts. Hands up if you're familiar with this pointy-looking triangle. Yes, Maslow's hierarchy. I find it's a really interesting way to think about, well, what are people's needs? What do they need to feel safe? So if we look at the very basic levels in a workplace setting, we could say, well, biological and psychological needs, I'm not going to feel safe if I feel that my job's under threat. And maybe if I'm going out and doing some strange things and I'm learning and I'm experimenting, and what if I fail? Is that actually going to make me, maybe lose my job? Well, if that's the case, do you think I'm going to go out and learn? No. So there are two ways to have a look at this aspect. One is the aspect of you as a leader of people feeling safe, just as much as your team members need an opportunity and an environment where they feel safe as well. So if we look at these two paradigms, what do you need to feel? How do you feel secure? Let's listen to this. I want you to think about the emotions that this starts to generate in you. so everyone knows the emotion that they're feeling now? All right, let's have a look at this one. So, which one made you feel more secure? Right, so hands up if you like sharks. Yes, a few people. Yeah, awesome, yeah, bring on the sharks. What about hands up if the second one made you feel more secure? Yeah, strange, isn't it? It's like this is called shark music. And I know those of you who are parents and even leaders of teams, you see your team going and doing something and you go, oh my God, what on earth's going on? That shark music immediately kicks off and you go, oh, I've got to go and save them. And then there are the times where you go, well, you read the situation and go, oh, actually, I might feel like that there's danger going on, but maybe I should wait. Maybe you haven't read the situation right. And the Circle of Security calls this shark music. Do you hear shark music when there isn't? Because if you don't feel secure, if you are anxious, then there is no way that your team or even your children are actually going to feel safe to explore. So that's you. Well, do they feel secure? What kind of factors do we need to be mindful of in relation to them feeling secure? The big thing that I always go back to is Hofstede's cultural dimensions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just a few. Power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism, long-term orientation, masculinity, and indulgence. Whole range of factors that over about 40 years, almost 40 years, this guy's been researching in relation to culture. Different ways to actually understand the factors involved with culture. So the first one, power distance. I'm going to have a look at these two sides. Have a think about the behaviours that you see in your team and around the team. And so hands up those of you who think the behaviours on this side that you see a lot of. Some. All right, are the rest of you see mostly these behaviours, these kinds of things? Some of you? Okay. For Hofstede, and elements of power distance in reflecting of an organisational culture, cultures that feel safe around hierarchy. When they see hierarchy, they'll feel safe. Do they feel safe when there are well-defined roles? Does this culture, team or otherwise, do they feel safe when they're able to blame someone else? Or is the culture that you're dealing with, do they feel safe when people are striving to equalise power? Well, let's take a look at where a whole bunch of countries sit. And yes, I may try and include Aussie and NZ. So for Australians, they're a little bit stronger with power distance. They feel more comfortable when there's structure, well-defined roles. For New Zealand, they feel a little bit less so in relation to those kinds of constraints. Now this is not a value judgment. Power distance and structure and authority and hierarchy is actually really, really important. Without that, we have chaos. But this is just a facet of culture. In fact, for Western cultures, because we don't tend to like a lot of power distance, in social situations we've got to navigate through all of those social niceties before we can get to a point where we can talk about something. In Asian countries like China and Japan, for example, they have very strict hierarchies, social hierarchies. And so everyone knows what they are and aren't allowed to say, what they can and can't say, or should or shouldn't say, because they have power distance, because they have those structures in place. So they feel safe to say some things over others. Individualism. All right, so hands up those of you who can recognise behaviours on the left. Some, okay. What about the right? Others? Yeah. So individualism, here's where a whole bunch of countries lie. Individualism is just about the I mentality versus the we mentality. Loose-knit teams, individuals taking care of yourself over looking after the whole. You can see that Australia, New Zealand, America, very big on me, very big on I. I feel safe when I can look after myself, when I don't have to worry about everyone else. Versus other cultures, very low on individualism, it's all about we. We are here together. We mentality, our work over my work. Masculinity. All right, so on one side, we've got hero work, and on the other side, we've got cooperation. One side that says, I need strict division of roles, or that's not my job syndrome. Hands up to those of you who've seen some of those behaviours on this side. Yeah. What about this side? Yeah. Okay. Let's break it down. Let's have a look. So we can see Sweden on this side, Australia, New Zealand, America on this side. Anyone notice something very interesting about Sweden? So what's a big country that's big on Agile that comes from there, originates from there? Spotify. All right, so they have a whole range of structures that they build in. And it's quite specifically because that's the kind of culture that Spotify finds itself in. So they feel safe when there is cooperation and when people are taking care of the team. So if we take all of their structures and pop it into a place that is very high on masculinity, do you think it's going to work? You can say no if you like, or you can say yes. This is one reason why Spotify say there is no Spotify model. We just have a culture, and they describe the culture visually, and a lot of it has to do with these dimensions. The we over the I, for example. That's masculinity. Last one, uncertainty avoidance. So a team will feel safe when they deal with ambiguity through control, intolerant of new ideas, when they perceive risks as threats, versus the let it happen. All right, where do you think Australia and New Zealand lie? This side? You think they lie on this side? All right, so Sweden, so where Spotify comes from, on this side? Or on this side? Let's break it down, see. All right. So if you live in Spotify, then things are going crazy and change. That's okay, because I feel safe. We can just go out and explore. Fear and risk and uncertainty is not a problem. Australians and New Zealanders, though, they don't like uncertainty. And they will not feel safe if the environment is uncertain. So for poor Tim, he had Australians, Chinese, Indians, and Pakistanis all in his team. And of course, they were learning how to be agile. They were learning Scrum at scale. And they experienced all kinds of problems, and they're all anxious about all of this change. And so what do you think the leaders did? Well, they tried to avoid conflict, because avoiding conflict made them feel safe. And they didn't like confrontation either. And that just increased the team's stress. It just made them feel even worse. Patrick Lencioni says, conflict is really good. You're going to pull out the conflict and let's actually tackle it head on. Well, guess what? You think people from these countries are going to actually feel safe when conflict is brought out into the open? Not at all. So this was my homework. I then sat down and went, all right, out of all of those things, let's actually create a picture of what actually makes them feel safe from a cultural perspective. And all the ones that are colourful. I did this particular one with my existing teams about a month ago now. And that provided me a picture of what makes them feel safe. I then took it and said, well, if those are the cultural things that make them feel safe, things they need to see in their environment, how am I going to help them to feel safe? This model comes from WasteFizz, and it looks at taking the heart of those values all the way up through to symbols of culture. And says, well, there are things that we can change really easily. Those are symbols. Things that are much harder to change, which are values. And there are elements in between. Symbols, behaviours, so demonstrations of power and status, symbolic action, attitudes and rituals, and then values. So symbols. What would be some symbols that a team that felt that hierarchy and status, if that made them feel comfortable, what kinds of symbols might help them to make them feel comfortable? Maybe role descriptions. Maybe an organisational chart. Maybe if we have to, maybe a more traditional Gantt chart view of our planning horizons. Maybe that will make them feel more comfortable. So here's, again, one I did actually last week, where I said, let's take the Lalou cultural model in order to structure Hofstede's elements. So structure, achievement, people, values, and self-organization. Note that importantly, I haven't made it hierarchical. These are just facets of culture. I think Lalou's got it wrong in this way where he goes, oh, teal is awesome, let's all be teal. And I go, yes, but without structure, if I feel safe, if I'm from an organization that's very high in power distance, I need structure to feel safe. So I just put them in quadrants. And then I said, all right, let's look at a behavioral change model like ADCAR, Prosei ADCAR. And let's start to actually pull out those things that we can start to do to help with behavioral change, to move them from their places where they feel not safe. Sorry about that, not safe. What things can we change in symbols? How do we actually create an environment where they feel safe enough to change slowly? So that's just creating a secure base. Being mindful of the culture. Be mindful of how you are in that culture and what's going to create a safe environment for your team. But so once people feel safe, then they go out and explore. And part of that is not just them going off and you going, bye. It's very much about you going with them. What the phrases the Circle of Security use are things like watch over me, delight in me, help me, enjoy with me. Amy says that supportive, coaching-oriented leadership, non-defensive responses to questions and challenges, that helps to create that environment that gives permission to go out and explore. Importantly, she says that this is not just you learning and not delivering. She quite explicitly says that we've got two axes. One, which we've got to provide an environment that makes you accountable for that, as much as learning as important. And both of those together creates your learning zone. Whereas if we just have high accountability and low psychological safety, people are going to feel anxious instead. So one aspect becomes delighting in supporting, where the other one is very much about, if I feel anxious, watch over me as I go out and explore. So I decided to break down those four elements over Kinevin to give you a sense of, well, what does anxious look like? So if we're in a simple zone, it's like, well, I'll just do what's safest. Or if we're in the complicated zone, well, what will happen if things are wrong? Will I get punished if I make the wrong choice? Or complex, I'll let someone else be involved and that they can make the decision. Or in chaos, well, it doesn't matter what happens, I'll just get punished. So exploring is very much helping them go out and be mindful of what quadrant are they in. Are they in a learning zone? Or are they in an anxiety zone? And being mindful of how to support the both. Filling the cup is when they start to come back. And again, when we look at anxiety, simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic environments, anxiety at its most basic means people are flooded. Basically, their amygdala has overpowered their prefrontal cortex and they simply cannot think logically at all. Their BPM's too high, they're in a fight or flight behavior. Contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, all of these things are coming out. And they're simply in no position to actually support themselves. So what do? Someone's coming back and they're going, oh, you can see that they're flooded. Well, they could come back to you seeking help and you could go, oh, yeah, grumble, I don't really like you very much. And that's just going to create anxiety and suppression of their behavior and distancing. And they're just going to go back into the anxiety mode. Or we could respond with indifference, distancing. And of course, if I keep on coming back to you going, oh, I'm flooded, and you just go, yeah, well, that's just life. It's just going to push them back into there, suppression of anxiety and distancing. They're going to push it down and not show you. Or we could respond by going in a positive way. And of course, that's going to push them over into a learning zone because the idea when they come back to have their cup filled is to reduce anxiety so that they feel safer to go back out. in these two spaces, we've got to watch out for miscuing. That is that as they come towards us, are we going to support them or not? And being mindful of what behaviours, feelings and attitudes are they going to show. Because I might look at you and go, oh, you look a bit, you seem to look anxious. And you might go, oh, I'm okay. That's a miscue. Charlotte basically says that feelings of psychological safety vanish and defensive behaviours escalate. Research shows that this will manifest itself in shutting down, internet addiction, other things, working longer hours. These are all miscues. Something is going on. They're not coming to you, coming back on the underside of the circle because they don't feel safe. Last one. So they've gone out, you've given them enough support, you've looked for the danger signs, you know that UV shark music is going, but you feel safe that at least, look, I've got to give them support. So I can't go, no, don't go. Yeah, go and try. Yeah, do that. And we'll talk about it at retrospective. That's often my go-to. Sometimes, and I hear this quite often, a Scrum Master will go, oh, I'm going to do this fantastic thing. And I go, oh my God, please don't do that. But I go, oh, okay. That's right, you go and do that. And we'll talk about it at retrospective. So I go with them and I watch them and then I come back, they fill their cup because things haven't gone quite well, and then I need to provide that safe environment where their emotions, I can actually give label to them and say, well, it's okay, help them disassemble it. And that safe haven is that critical last point of that feedback loop. So it's to protect me, comfort me, things have not gone well. If I've had successes, delight in me, absolutely, but help me to organise my feelings. Because if I'm flooded, then I'm simply not going to be thinking straight at all. Hands up if you recognise this movie. One of my favourites. In fact, really importantly, because it says that there are no emotions that are bad emotions. You just feel emotions. And for any normal person, all of these are in balance. So there are no bad feelings. Don't punish people for their emotions. Labeling emotions helps them deal with it. Oh, no, I can understand that I feel sad. What does that mean? Importantly, as you help them label your emotions, you feel angry, it's not you are angry. I feel sad, not you are sad. You're not your emotions. And that helps to distance them a little bit. Helps you as leaders provide the team opportunity to break those down to understand what those mean, particularly in relation to what they've learned. John Gottman says that trust is built in small moments. He calls this skill attunement. It's an opportunity where one person turns to another. And in those really small moments, he calls them sliding door moments. So as leaders, when you see these opportunities where you can see someone is flooded in the team, where they're looking for support, that's an opportunity. And each one of those small windows that you take advantage of to go out and support them will build trust. And that trust will then build those safe pair of hands. So a person can feel safe to go out and to come back, to go out and learn. Part of the problem in this part is that other people's emotions can be pretty scary. Seeing other people look angry, that can actually trigger emotions in you. I want you to have a think about, I wonder if this is going to work this way. Oh, there we go. Curiosity, shame, sadness, fear, and anger, joy. I want you to think back to your childhood for a moment. Have a think about those emotions, the emotions on that list that were not acceptable when you were growing up. When I was doing this particular exercise, said, okay, draw a circle, and all the emotions that you feel safe about, put inside, and all the ones that you don't feel comfortable with, put on at the boundaries, and so I drew it like this. And yeah, for me, when I was growing up, things like shame and fear and sadness and anger were not acceptable. I grew up in a household where it was, children will be seen and not heard. And in me, I recognized as I was going through this that there were emotions that I was not comfortable with. And that prevented me from providing an environment for my daughter to come back and feel safe. But moreover, from my teams as well. Because I don't deal with anger very well. This helped me be mindful of that, so that when someone came back and was looking for a safe pair of hands to fill their cup, that I could help them disassemble that. I could help them label those emotions, but being mindful that if I was their support mechanism, then I had to know the difference between the emotions that I felt comfortable with versus the ones that I didn't. So part of it is, think of it in terms of, and the phrases that Circle of Security use, being bigger, stronger, wiser, kinder. That's what they're saying. But not mean. So when you mean, you're using bigger, stronger, and wiser, but not kindness. Weak, are you taking charge? Well, you're missing the kindness part. Unavailable, so you're taking charge, but without the being bigger and stronger and wiser, kinder part. Mia reminded me that as we're going through Circle of Security, that in this kind of environment where you want to build psychological safety, we couldn't be the bad guy, because we would get miscues. If we were, then we would punish people for coming to us, or if we go and say, well, you're not doing Scrum this way, etc., well, that's going to undermine that trust relationship. It's going to undermine our ability to be able to create an environment that supported going out and learning and coming back when things weren't working so well. Or to support delighting me, this is really great, and going out with them. They wouldn't want to engage us in that kind of activity. So don't be authoritarian and punitive. Be bigger, stronger, wiser, kinder. Let's sum up. So this is Inara. We went to Sovereign Hill not too long ago, and she went, "Oh, Daddy, watch me, watch me." And I saw this big hill and my shark music went off, and I thought she's going to slide and slip and fall down and graze herself. But I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to support her, because she wanted to do this. And you'll notice very soon she'll check back in with me visually. She kind of gets towards the top, checks in that I'm still there, dusts herself off, and then she's like, yeah, I've done it. Exactly the same with teams. You'll see it all the time. I see it at Daily Scrum, where I'm there, and the team stop talking to themselves, and they're kind of, checking with each other, but keep on looking at me as if to go, oh, are we doing this okay? Really small micro-interactions. But it's not a simple mechanism of going, well, I want my team to be safe, and so I'll just create an environment in which they feel safe. That's not really how it works. Think about it more like this. Map your understanding of their needs. Understand what they need culturally, psychologically to feel safe. Stand back and learn. Learn to do that. Learn to actually be present, watching yourself and watching them, but to support them in the doing. Help them unpack what they're doing. And that's going to help them feel secure. Thank you very much.
I think we can all agree that was a beautiful presentation. Very well put together. Thank you, Matt. We've got just a couple of minutes now, so I don't know if people got any questions they want to run through quickly. Take one or two questions from the audience.
Yes.
What techniques might you suggest? Because we all have that.
Mm-hmm.
Have that, particularly reading from somebody else. Your heart rate goes up. You want to be present. You're freaking out. So do you have any tips on how to get a handle on that?
It's funny you should say that, because that was my presentation last year.
Yeah.
So the question was, someone obviously is flooded. Their amygdala has overpowered their prefrontal cortex. They can't think straight. One technique that I used with a team was that I introduced that term flooded to them and said that part of you as a team is to help and support each other. So if you see two team members go at it, use that as a trigger word. You look flooded. And we discussed that was then an opportunity for, and this goes back to also Gottman's research, some of the tips that he uses. He says this is time to actually take a pause, to actually go away and what he calls self-soothe, meaning don't go away and go, oh, if I only had have said this, then I would have won the argument, yeah. It's a no, go away, take a walk, allow your amygdala to kind of settle down, your prefrontal cortex to come back up so that your heart rate goes down. Just go out and, in fact, some of the team members agreed that actually they like going for a walk when they're feeling a bit like that. And so it gave permission for that behaviour. Either someone would say to the other, oh, you look flooded if they were in an argument, or oh, I'm feeling flooded, etc. That would then be the signal. Someone would say, okay, the time box is half an hour or 45 minutes, noting that that was not only a time to go away and chill, but also, very importantly, then to come back. Because if we're having an argument and I go, oh, I flooded, and then I leave, but I don't come back, then you probably feel abandoned. Oh, this was something that was important probably to actually discuss. Although Gottman would say about 90% of issues that we actually fight about, we're actually arguing about nothing. So maybe it's okay to come back and go, actually, I think we're talking about nothing, we're arguing about nothing, and let's, now that we're chilled back down, let's actually get back into work. But the term flooded was a really valuable keyword that I learned, certainly personally in my own relationships, but also with that team. In fact, that was exactly that team that we used that keyword with.
One more question? Going once, going twice.
Oh, over there. Hello. Yes.
That's all work well, but Agile isn't actually neutral on, I think, any of them, but many of them it's not neutral on. That's, for example, it prizes less defined roles and that sort of thing. So how do you cope with the fact that with this situation where culturally people are more happy with well-defined roles and fairly rigid kind of hierarchies when you're in an Agile environment?
Yep.
As well as being an Agile environment.
Yep. So if I understand your question correctly, culturally it might be that people feel safe when there's hierarchy, and the Agile community has a sense that hierarchy is not so good and has less well-defined roles. How do you get them to move from there where they feel safe to there where things are maybe a little less well-defined? Well, that's a very good question. Should you? So if I think about bigger, wiser, kinder, stronger, we know that, like the first question, and this is what I do now, I'll go to executives and go, do you want a high-performing team? Do you want them to be happy? Do you want them to have that autonomy, mastery, purpose that we all talk about? And if the answer is yes, then the next answer is, and this comes from the Michael Sahato playbook, all right, well, if you want that, are you willing to change the culture? Because if you're not, then the answer has to be, well, then don't bother. A lot of what we do is changing culture. That's what Spotify did over a decade. But an organization's culture is very much like its personality. It changes very, very, very slowly. And do we want high-performing teams? Yes. The trade-off is maybe less defined roles. So what I tend to do, and that's what I showed you with the big thing that we did, was, well, we want to get towards that kind of behavior, but this is how they currently feel. What are going to be some of the first things that we can do to make them still feel safe about where we're going? And so role definition became one of those. What is a Scrum Master? What is a product owner? What do we expect? And we wrote those from a behavioral expectation perspective. What do we expect Scrum Masters to actually do? What do we expect product owners to actually do? Or if you're in a development team, what does that look like and what do we expect those people to actually do? We then looked at that in terms of the structure, which we only did a few days ago, structure of the whole program. Where are all the teams? Where are all the product owners? And how were we going to organize the delivery of value through those channels? And so we used symbols because this organization is a public service organization, government organization, and they feel very safe when there is lots of structure, lots of hierarchy. And so basically we use the hierarchy against them. We use those things to help them create awareness of actually, we can actually represent some of those things that are perhaps have an idea that they're less organized. We can still describe them in a very organized kind of way. And so that's what it helped them to do. But it takes a long time. Hence, I'll use quite deliberately ProSci ADCAR, or trans-theoretical model behavioral change. So same change mechanisms that I might use to have someone to start exercising, or to have someone give up smoking. Exactly the same kinds of behavioral change mechanisms are really good to apply to changing teams from that kind of culture and that kind of organization, slowly through steps where they'll get to an endpoint where they enjoy that work so much that it becomes self-reinforcing. Does that answer your question?
Afraid that's all the time we've got for questions, but Matt's going to be around the next couple of days, and please join me in thanking Matt.
Thank you.
And just so you're aware, the next session in here is Aldo, Rall and Andy Cooper on a Leadership Survival Guide Transformation, Level 3, Inclusive Collaboration, How Differences Can Make a Difference, Born to Learn, and on Level 4, Shaking Leads to Shake Up. Thank you. Nice one, Matt.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Siva Kumar. I'm an Agile coach with Assurity. And at some point of my life, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with these two gentlemen here. So I thought I'll take this opportunity to introduce them. Our next presenters are Aldo, Rall from New Zealand Police and Andy Cooper from Software Education with a Leadership Survival Guide to Transformation. Aldo has over 18 years of experience in a range of industries, including financial services, healthcare, IT, management consulting, and education in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the UK. He has worked with a range of clients on Agile transformations as an Agile and testing coach. Aldo remains fascinated with continuous change in industry, which ensures there's always something new to learn, regardless of experience levels or qualifications. Over time, Aldo has honed his skills in the practical elements of developing working software, but his greatest passion lies in the people dimension of the people, process, technology mix, and how this translates into successful IT strategy, teams, projects, and practitioners. Andy Cooper is the Group Manager Global for Software Education, and is responsible for developing Softed's training and consulting business outside of Australia and New Zealand, and works with clients developing their agility around the world. Andy has a strong interest in agility for business as an agile marketer for CA Technologies, and was a track lead on the business agility track for the International Consortium for Agile, IC Agile. Andy has over 20 years of experience working for technology companies such as CA, Oracle, and Infomix in business and consulting roles, and has managed and worked in teams spanning New Zealand, Australia, Asia, and the US. Please put your hands together to welcome Aldo and Andy.
So Agile's been around since 2001. And during the last number of years, and especially more over the last year, we've seen big corporates quite publicly pronouncing that they are adopting Agile wholesale into all of their operations. The organizations that's done this earlier, we seem to really hear back from how the transformation really went. And this talk is, we were quite curious about, why does that happen? Why does Agile turn into a swear word in those organizations? What went wrong with their transformations? Hi everybody, I'm Aldo.
And I'm Andy.
So why this talk? We were actually thinking about this, and we noticed that we were from fairly different backgrounds. Andy's a Kiwi bloke that likes to go downhill on a bicycle very fast, and I'm from another country where people still think they can play rugby.
Yeah. Despite the obvious differences, Aldo and I decided that this was a really important question. We were hearing it from a lot of our clients. We experienced ourselves working in organizations. So we sought to see whether we could find any answers to some of these questions. And we decided to work together. Agile is about pairing. And also in doing this as well, I think learning is teaching, teaching is learning. So part of our journey is to help share our experience and learning in this talk.
Okay, so as part of us this introduction, let's go to a house somewhere in Wellington. So over the last number of years, who of you have observed kids playing? Cool. And how many of you have observed this?
Yep.
Okay. And just while we're interacting, who's had an answer like that? Shane, have you had an answer like that? Okay, well, I'm still waiting for my kids to tell me that. Now, let's just recall quickly what entropy is from high school physics. It's an ordered state of something going into an increased state of disorder, and that's what entropy is called. Now, we can observe entropy in our personal lives. I mean, the picture there with the room is quite obvious, but do we see entropy in our professional lives? Do we see it in our organizations? Yeah. And the amazing thing is, it sometimes creeps up on you, and then the next minute when you blink, you're in full entropy.
Okay, the first tool we're going to talk about, we'll just check in and see who's here has heard of the Cynefin framework. Okay, cool. We thought there might be a lot, but we see this as, so just for those of you that don't, Cynefin is a Welsh word that means habitat or place, which actually is quite apt given the description or the picture that Aldo showed before, which showed potentially what was quite normal-looking place becoming very chaotic.
Okay, so it's a sense-making device, just to recap for you guys. It's made up of 5 domains. We've got simple, complicated, complex, chaotic, and that dark center of disorder. I'm not going to go into each one of the models. What we want to focus on is that on the right-hand side, you sit with ordered domains where the cause and effect is known. So even if you do fall into entropy, you are able to have standard operating procedures or experts to be able to help you deal with that situations. Where we're going to be focusing on, and Ken Schwaber spoke about some of this as well this morning, is on this left-hand side, the unordered side, and this is where cause and effect cannot be worked out in advance. You can only look at it in hindsight. So what we want to talk about is all of this VUCA elements. What is going to cause us to fall into chaos and disorder, into the complex and chaotic domains? And then what can we do to get ourselves out of the left-hand side into the right-hand side of the Cynefin framework? So we call them VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Okay, so this is a recent chart that came from a McKinsey publication just published last month, which is showing a couple of things. So along the bottom, we're talking effectively disruption or instability in the environment, and on the other axis, we're showing how prepared organizations are. So obviously over in the top right here, you can see that the most disrupted type of organizations here are the telecommunications, media, entertainment. We see that here in New Zealand, obviously, with lots of mergers and acquisitions and threats of mergers and acquisitions between like Sky and with Netflix there, Telecom New Zealand and Vodafone, all being impacted to some degree by each other and by the push from new players coming in. Further over here, we see like financial services. So Aldo mentioned before, like ANZ have recently said that they're going to be taking Agile to the organization over a pretty short time frame. And then as we move further over, we see, like the social sector and public sector, perhaps less disrupted, but the pull from these organizations over here, where expectations from consumers are growing in terms of what they expect from the public service, is still having an impact and is still leading to a greater rate of change within all sectors. So the other thing that we're terming this the busyness epidemic, and that's something that we see as a real impediment to transformational growth, is this concept that with all of this change going on, we're actually probably doing a lot more, but we're actually spending a lot less time doing productive deep work. So a study from Bain Company recently is showing that managers are spending, and managers/leaders, depending on from the first topic, are spending less than 7 hours per week of uninterrupted time, which is a pretty appalling statistic, really, in terms of what knowledge work is about. And then a lot of that time is spent attending meetings, sending emails, and working in small increments. So yes, a lot of that time is valuable, but how much of that time is valuable, and how are we going to continue when things continue to change? And of course, as we get more busy, we have less energy. With less energy, we get less innovation, and obviously that has a flow-on in terms of engagement as well. And we see that this is a stat from the NZ Stats Department, that our labour productivity in New Zealand is actually not increasing. So despite the fact we're working harder and probably doing more, we're actually producing less from an economic point of view, which has the downside of meaning that that's one of the reasons why wages are not growing in New Zealand, because we're not producing more. And the other interesting areas is that employee from the recent Aon Hewitt survey, only 14% of our employees are actively engaged.
Who's seen the State of Agile report? Okay, so it's been a running report for the last 11 years, and the latest report is just repeating a trend from the previous number of years of where the top 5 of challenges with adopting Agile hasn't much changed. So this tells us one of 3 things. Either organizations are not able to understand that they are in a state of VUCA, or They understand that they're in a state of VUCA, but they're not able to know how to get out. They're struggling to get out of it. And thirdly is that they're struggling to sustain any lasting transformation. So we believe these challenges have got one underlying common denominator, and that's leadership agility. So we're going to present you now with a hypothesis. In her book, Victoria Swisher wrote, "How can you arm yourself so that you can successfully tackle those new unfamiliar situations that are bound to come your way, those VUCAs?" And she says it's through learning.
Okay, so we believe that learning agility is actually at the heart of creating this. And to do this, we've created what we call the virtuous cycle. When we say leader, maybe we should reframe it as agilist, depending on, we heard in the first talk. But anyway, we'll use that term interchangeably. But here, effectively, we're saying that from our perspective, we have to start and focus on leadership. If we want to build sustainable transformation, leadership is an area we really need to focus on. Leadership obviously can have a massive impact over the people who are underneath. Obviously, systems and structures can also be impacted by leaders. By doing so, that has, and will through research we can show you later on, has a positive impact on employee engagement, and that is what will lead to sustainable transformation. But at heart of this, as individuals, as leaders, is the concept of learning agility.
So this takes us to showing you how you can survive, or us showing you how you can survive through learning in this high VUCA environment. So
we've termed this the A&A Adaptive Leadership Survival Guide. That's to be slightly different from the AA, the Automobile Association, although we do try and provide a few visual maps along the way. All the other AA as well, which some of you, hopefully not too many know of, which is the Alcoholics Anonymous. Even though Aldo and I did consume a few beers in the consumption of this talk, we hope that by learning and applying some of this that you can avoid partaking of their services.
So as part of the survival guide, we needed a way of making sense of how learning works within ourselves, into teams and into organizations. And we had to we combined quite a lot of mental models into a meta model, and we intentionally overcomplicated it so that it just could make sense to us. And here it is. We call it the AA Meta Mental Model. Now, I bet you if you've had a few beers, you can't say it that fast. But basically, what happens is that any learning that happens starts with me. Any transformation that needs to happen starts with me. And the next level of influence is at your teams, and the next level after that is at my organizations. You can download a A3 for yourself later from that link. We use the plurals for teams and organizations because we're all part of multiple teams and multiple organizations. I'm a scout leader as well as employed by an employer. So I'm working with two different organizations. I'm also part of two different teams. So this is what we use to make sense when we talk about learning going forward.
Okay, so obviously the starting point is me. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on that because that's the thing that we can all fix and influence. Just a point about leadership as well. From our perspective, we're all leaders. As you'll hear at the end, we just have different domains of authority. So from our point of view, that's our viewpoint. Obviously, that's very supported by the Agile principles as well. But within this concept here, we're going to be looking at what are the skills and tools that I need as an individual to deal with the VUCA and entropy that we've talked about.
Okay, so let's look at skills. So we broke the section down into skills and tools, and this is very practical things you can go and apply as soon as we finish with this talk. So the very first thing is to develop thinking and memory skills. So both of us have recently completed a Coursera MOOC called Learning How to Learn, and it is by far the most popular MOOC on Coursera, and it's with good reason. It's highly recommended. So some of the skills that we've learned about is, the first one is called chunking, and this is where you take a bunch of individual pieces of information and combine them into a single concept or a chunk in that respect. So for instance, Pythagoras' theorem, already, if we all recall that, it combines the whole equation inside instead of us having to go and mention the whole equation. The next one is using focused and diffused modes, and especially the interplay between them. That's quite important. So focused mode is like, imagine your brain is like a torch. A focused mode is really focusing the beam of that torch in a very narrow area or a small area. Whereas a diffused mode is as if you make the torch going a little bit wider and not just focusing on a specific area.
Okay, so related to that is this concept of mental models as well, which is a topic or thing that we're starting to hear quite a lot more about. But effectively, a mental model is a series of chunks. It's effectively us being able to understand and relate concepts together. So there's actually, this is a fundamental thing, I think, in leadership as well. And the reason why we started with this whole learning agility is that a lot of people have forgotten how to learn. And doing that learning to learn really helped us learn again, which is why we encourage you to do it as well, because it teaches you some new good tricks about learning. But one of the things that you move on from is what I need to learn. And so mental models are the sort of things that you need to start learning as a leader. There's already quite a good site, I think, called Farnham Street Blog, which we encourage you to go to. There, the guys catalogued 137 things you should know under different categories. So again, as part of a learning backlog, encourage you to go there. He's got a blog as well, which gives a whole bunch of things that, as a leader, you should know, because these are the things that help you understand the world. And then the last concept as well is the concept of sleep. So why are we talking about sleep when we're actually hoping you're not? Is that sleep, regarding learning, is actually really important. And again, I think there's been a lot of good research lately about the impact of lack of sleep and the importance of sleep for us learning and thinking. So when we sleep, it clears away a lot of toxins that build during the day, which is obviously important. But more importantly, it also helps rearrange things as well. So things that we've done during the day get rearranged at night. And that's why when we say sleep on it, it literally means that we probably wake up with some new insights. So some of the things we talked about, 4 chunks, things get rearranged with sleep. If we don't get enough of sleep, then some of these things don't happen. So as someone that used to pride myself on not sleeping a lot, I realised that I've shortchanged myself and probably a lot of other people. So I've now personally made a real effort to actually go to bed earlier. One of the good things is having a watch which tracks your sleep patterns. I've seen from that, the benefit of that is that I'm now getting more deep sleep, and I feel like I'm benefiting from that as well.
Okay, so let's just inform ourselves with some research on learning agility. And one thing that that we understood from our research is that the successful leaders that's out there are really able to read a lot. They read at least 2 books a month. And through this process of reading, they're able to actually be able to create those previous slides, the chunking and the diffused modes, and actually start embedding those skills in their day-to-day behaviors. The Alvin Toffler said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn.
So Korn Ferry is a large US but a global research company. So they've done a lot of research into this whole concept of learning agility. And that's an area that they now focus on. So if they're looking at who are the high potential people, who are the organizations that are likely to succeed in the VUCA world, learning agility is you can see all the facts there, the thing that they perceive as being the most important factor that will lead to a long-term sustainable and the ability to be able to cope with the VUCA world. So that's at an individual level. So individuals get promoted faster with those with learning agility, and organizations who have leaders and others that are leadership, have leadership agility are those that succeed faster.
So let's look at some additional survival skills, and this is where we introduce learning agility as that skill. We spoke to some colleagues and we found that they all agree that traditional learning practices are becoming less effective. Those classroom trainings and just reading something is becoming less effective for them. And learning doesn't stop when you leave the classroom. It continues around life around us. There's quite a lot of interaction. So there's a lot of active learning that we employ in our own lives and also in team contexts. So the question is then, how can we do so in a consistent manner? And this is where we want to introduce you to learning agility spirals. So this is how you can actually intentionally and actively learn in everything. So it's made up of 5 steps. The first step is called awareness. We all have means and ways of becoming aware of what's happening around us. There are also a whole host of tools that can generate that awareness. The moment the awareness exists, you'll start exploring alternatives. You'll start creating certain experiments with their metrics that you can actually then start looking at what you could potentially do to perhaps move out of that VUCA situation into the audit side of Cynefin. And then you're going to press play those experiments and capture the metrics. Once you've done that, the next step is to actually evaluate that learning. What did we notice when we look at the metrics we've captured? What did we notice from the experience or from the interaction? And then the last one is that sharing and explaining. Andy started off with talking about teaching. So this is where you perhaps would teach, you would share with other teams, with other people, what you found, what you've learned. But your learning doesn't stop there, because this first cycle may have triggered more awareness about something else. And this becomes a spiral of continuous intentional learning that just carries on. So some people will have multiple spirals going on. Some people would be at it for years. They would have long spirals. Some spirals would be very short. Perhaps something has been mentioned in this conference that will only start your journey into that spirals.
Okay, so another area that we thought was relevant to talk about here, which is very relevant in terms of decision-making leadership, is this whole area of biases, or cognitive biases. So last year, someone, I believe he was on paternity leave, who was interested in the topic, spent a month categorizing the 167 known biases down into this codex, which again, we're not expecting you to be able to read, but it's something really useful to look at. Because the whole concept of biases is now becoming something that as leaders we really need to understand more from a personal point of view, as well as how biases are impacting other people. So there are 4 main reasons, according to this, why we have biases, and that's for dealing with too much information. So we're flooded with information, how do we deal with it? Not enough meaning, so once we've filtered all that information, then how do we join the dots in our head? Then the third area is needing to act fast, so we're built to be able to respond to threats quickly, so how do we able to act quickly? And then the last reason is, what should we remember? We get so much information coming in all the time that we can't possibly remember it all. So the brain has all these energy-saving devices, hacks, or whatever you want to call it, to try and limit the amount of things that we do. So biases are really there. They're brain hacks in a way designed to energy save, to save us from energy. Now that's really good in a lot of cases, but there are some big downsides to that as well.
Okay, so we've covered some skills. Let's look at some tools to support those skills. And the very first one is the SCARF model. Who's heard of that? Cool. For those that you haven't heard of it, it really looks at what are our triggers for reward, and in our reward centers in our brains, and what's the triggers for our threat centers in our brain. So you will either have a towards or an away reaction across 5 dimensions, which is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And fairness is a big trigger for myself, even when I'm not being mistreated and I see somebody else, it's quite a big trigger for me. The next tool.
Okay, so we talked about biases before, and again, the same organization, Neuro Leadership Institute, again, encourage people, if you haven't been there, they're actually really good place to go and get information on neuro-based leadership, so really modern thinking about leadership things. So then I've developed this model called the SEEDS model. Again, the thing about biases as well is, I think we've all got them, we all have them, they're built into us. That is, that's the way it is. I think like a lot of these things, it's about awareness. So it's understanding that all these biases are built in, they're there, and it's understanding the impact on ourselves and catching them before they happen. So a good example which illustrates a couple of things about biases, on the radio when I was driving back a couple of days ago, I heard a new Minister for Women's Affairs talking about how there was, Julianne Genter talking about the goal now to produce pay parity with women, because obviously there's a problem and it hasn't been the case. And then what she mentioned in that was that the reason that there wasn't pay parity is because of all these unconscious biases. Now the actual interesting research is that that's actually probably true. They're the main reason why there is pay gap. But the funny thing about that is, why did I remember that? So there's a bunch of my biases at play in the fact that I remember that. Okay, I'm talking about it. So therefore a couple of, at least a couple of biases came in for me to be able to remember that. So there's recency, and then there's a whole bunch of other ones that my other forgetting biases have said that I probably didn't need to know as well. So we've got biases all the time. They can work for us, but they may also count against us. Then there's other, the clarity of purpose. So one of the previous speakers talked about the Simon Sinek's why. So we're not going to go in a lot of detail about that, but the one really interesting thing you may not be aware is that he's got a course called the Why Discovery, which is for me. So it's not just an organization, but you can do your own personal why. And it's actually a very interesting and useful thing to do.
I'm busy in completing mine, and by giving this talk and the journey that I've been on, I've actually been living my why.
Yeah, and I haven't really had time to do that, although I should, although I'm thinking that my why has probably got something to do with mountain biking, but I'm probably now wondering about the how. Okay, so the next area that we're going to talk about is the next thing that we deal with the most. So having looked at ourselves and the things that we can do to increase our learning agility, we're now going to look at how does that work within a team. And the other key point about that as well is that within teams, there's obviously the concept of change and change management. So I think that some of the talks before have probably talked about that as well. So we're really going to touch on it. But we see this part of transformation, that change and leadership of change is a skill that all leaders need to have.
Okay, so this must look familiar. Project Aristotle from Google Teams. We just heard a talk before about psychological safety, and this was also mentioned, is that when you're safe to take risks, be yourself, make mistakes, raise problems, ask questions, and disagree in a very in the right way. No chairs involved. Those things have all got in common. It's when it's safe to take risks and make mistakes, it means it's experiment friendly. So what we want to get into the teams that we work in is a safety to run experiments. The other things that's really important as well is that recognition and acknowledgement, very important. If you don't get recognition and acknowledgement, you are going to struggle to cope with or to be part of a team. And then very last, again, coming back, the team as well must have clarity and purpose.
Okay, so anyone here a BA? Yay! Okay, so we're going to try and change the title of BA from being the business analyst to a busyness analyst. So really that's one of the key things that we think we need to do to be able to try and figure out how do we get this time to learn, how do we get the time to think, is that part of it is we need to re-examine what we're doing. So we need to really get very focused about what is it we do, how do we create value. Look at where we spend our time and start treating our time like dollars. And the other thing that's really important about that is also understanding our energy cycles as well. So humans are pretty well creatures of habit and cycles. So most of us follow pretty similar sort of cycles. So again, this is not a new research, but a lot of existing research shows that most of us have a highest amount of energy in the morning, typically in 2 cycles between about 9 and 12 and about 3 to 6. But the most energy when we have the most clarity is in the morning. And yet when do we end up having a lot of our meetings and other things that drain perhaps our time and energy? It's often then. So it's thinking about the better use of your time, planning it better, that can make quite a big difference in terms of what you get done and how you get it done as well. And I think this comes back to the 20% time as well. So if you start examining where your time goes, perhaps all the meetings you maybe don't need to attend, the emails that you don't have to write, then hopefully over time, as I have done, you can start figuring out how you can claim back this 20% so that you can spend the time on active learning. And for a couple of resources, so the Deep Work is a really good book, as is Smarter, Faster, Better. They're really good books in this specific place about personal productivity, figuring out where you spend your time and what you do.
Okay, learning doesn't just stop with individuals, it continues in teams as well. So when you want successful learning agility in a team context, you need everybody to participate in that learning. You can't have one person not participating while the rest of the team does that. You also want to be aware of what that current step is that you're on. Are we in the awareness step, or are we evaluating, or are we sharing? And then it's really good to visualize those steps. Very important, have multiple tools available to perform at every step. So what you find is when you download this talk later on, at the end, there's a whole host of additional tools for each one of these steps. And very important, celebrate what you've learned, celebrate what you found. And then we saw about that experiment friendly and psychological safety, keep the environment fail safe. So let's look at some tools going forward. We found this article, and basically there's so much out there to learn. What is the more important thing for you to learn right now? And this tool, this little decision quadrants help you to decide what's important right now. So the first thing is, what's your highest priority, is schedule that block of time. So that 20% time that Andy spoke about, that's your highest priority. And then what's your lowest priority? Learn it as the chance arises. Perhaps you listen to an audiobook on the way to work in your commute. And this is a way of giving you prioritization. We spoke about celebrating the learning, and here's another tool called the Celebration Grid, developed by Jürgen Appello. I've used this quite successfully even in retrospectives. And this is really looking at what worked and what didn't work in your experiments. And a failed experiment is not a failure of the team, it is actually just an experiment that failed, and it gives you something to learn from. So celebrate both your failed and your successful experiments. So really a good tool to use. So we spoke about visualizing the training and knowing which step you're on. Ooh, sorry, wrong button. That didn't come out very nicely. Okay, there's supposed to be a Kanban. So there's going to be a column there. There's your column, there's your backlog, there's another column for run. This is the next step, the evaluate. And this is the share column, and then the done column. And you can actually then put your learning agility steps across there. It's a learning Kanban. And then there's your stickies, that 3M stickies, that you can actually start and bringing continuous learning into your team so that you can learn. And then perhaps those mental models, those subtopics that we spoke about earlier, you can then get them all lined up there and start this process of continuous learning in your team.
Okay, just a couple of, very quickly on this as well. Hopefully most of you are familiar with this, but again, the A3 concept is one that's really important. I think if you're trying to deal with this concept of busyness and trying to avoid extra work. So A3s are really simple things. They originally came from the Toyota production system, but they've been now adapted into multiple areas. So it used to be predominantly based around problems and suggested solutions, but now there's canvases for pretty well covering everything. But personally, I think these are really good things to try and experiment with. Recently, I've been using the Jeff Patton's Opportunity Canvas for looking at how do we create some more impactful training for one of my clients. And this worked really well as a way of describing the problem, articulating the solution without taking a lot of my time. So really, these A3s are really things that I think, as busyness analysts, we probably need to start using more of.
There is another term for busyness analysts. It's also called a BA. It's called a busyness architect. So if you've got a management title, then watch out for that one. There's some other tools as well for recognition and appreciation. Also from Management 3.0 is a kudos box and kudos cards and those 12 steps of happiness. But when you do give recognition and acknowledgement, make sure that you, having technical issues here, recognize people and be very specific about that recognition. Don't just generalize the recognition. That peer-to-peer recognition in the team is really important. And share those recognition stories and then make it easy and frequent. There's other, we spoke about change leadership, so it's been mentioned earlier. There's McKinsey's 7S framework and ADKAR model. Now, some people think that both of these can be a little bit too linear. What a guy called Jason Little came up with is called Lean Change Management, really a good book to go read about how to incrementally and iteratively affect change management in your environment. We don't have much time on the organizations level. It's just learning doesn't stop just with me and the teams that I'm in, but also continues and extends into the organizations.
Okay, so at an organizational level, this is a relatively recent book. I think it's a couple of years old now, that looked at leadership or extraordinary leadership in Australia and New Zealand. So it's very relevant to our market. And it's quite a good read to sort of look at what are the practices that extraordinary leadership involved. And I think in a lot of the things we've covered at a personal and at a team level, but it's probably worth reiterating these things. These are the sort of things they've found as at an organizational level are the things that leaders need to do. And by doing these things, there is quite clearly an association with engagement, which we believe, again, is going to be how we can deal with disruption.
And then, like I said, learning doesn't stop. There's quite a lot of research about learning organizations and quite a lot of books written about it. A very mature learning organization will have quite a high density of these learning spirals, and you'll see when you walk through that you'll see quite a large amount of them, and some of the spirals would have been carrying on for quite a number of years. This is a summary slide of all the skills and the tools we've spoken about today. So just to refresh your mind about it, just want to bring this last sentence in there. What we found was that success isn't really born into you. It is actually just because you have better beliefs, habits, and discipline inside people, teams, and organizations that you're part of.
Okay, I've got a good quote to finish off with. And that's one of the main reasons why we decided leadership is where we need to start from this perspective of sustainable transformations. Of course, we also made the point before that we're all leaders. But if we do have a big impact and focus on leadership, which is often, from my perspective, the area that's probably least focused on in an agile transformation, it will have a disproportionate impact on the people, the systems and processes, because they're the ones, obviously, that can change that, which does, through in that previous slide, show very conclusively, and if you read that book about engagement, it does lead to higher employee engagement, which will lead to more sustainable transformations. Now, this also segues into a talk that's coming up later on this afternoon. Jacob, who was here introducing the keynotes, is doing a talk about modern Agile. encourage you to go along to that because a lot of the concept of modern Agile are very much in sync with what we've been talking about. So at an organizational level, modern Agile in views all of those things. So again, encourage you to go along and listen to Jacob talk about that.
Okay, cool. So where do I start? We've introduced you to with quite a lot of skills and tools that you can go look at. You can go build that in a Kanban and visualize your learning, but it all starts with me. You don't really need permission from your manager or your HR department to start learning. You have quite a lot of opportunities in your day-to-day work to start that continuous learning. Also have a clear sense of purpose for what do you want to achieve with that learning. Reduce waste, and you spoke about that busyness epidemic. Make sure you're a BA and not a BA. Visualize your learning. We showed you how you can do that in a Kanban. Be comfortable with failure and ambiguity. We are going to have to accept that we live in a high VUCA world. Be comfortable with that, and then experiment quite a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy and Aldo. There was a lot of learning from your talk. We have a couple of minutes. We can take some questions. Is there any?
It's before lunch.
I know, yeah. So the only thing between you and lunch is some questions. Yes, please.
Well, everything. Well, I think the learning one that I mentioned before, so both of us did that learning to learn quite recently, and that really made a big impact on, I think, both of us. So part of it is learning to learn again is what it talks about, and then consciously doing that. So the fact that we're starting to apply some of these tools is part of it as well. So right now, what I'm currently learning, I mean, it's probably about 5 things, but the enterprise, the book that had about the sustainable transformations, to me, it's about how do we take that into the organization.
The people that created the Learning How to Learn MOOC created another one called Mindshift.
It's true.
I'm busy with that for my personal self, and in one of the teams that I'm involved with at police, we are actually we have a sort of a learning Kanban that doesn't look exactly like that, but we are tracking what are the things we're learning and how does that transform the team. Cool.
As learning and leadership evangelists,
Yep.
based on your experience, what is the scale of New Zealand organizations from 1 to 10?
What's the scale?
If you have to rate New Zealand organizations, where are we in a scale of 1 to 10?
I think, I mean, and this is, I can only talk anecdotally, that book has some research in there, but I think it's, you know, if we look at the Hewitt engagement survey, you know, 16%, I think that gives a pretty clear indication that it's pretty low. So I don't know what, maybe 3 or 4 would be, you know, somewhat of a guess. And I think anecdotally we've heard, you know, lots of stories about leadership. You know, it probably isn't a skill in New Zealand to some degree, and it is something that probably needs to be a big focus. Yeah.
You mentioned you're going to promote SAP Management 3.0, and you mentioned a couple of the kudo tasks.
Yeah.
Have you ever done anything with merit money? And if you have, what experiences have you had with that?
No, not personally. Can you explain that a bit more?
So merit money is the concept of moving away from the sort of annual bonus,
Right.
doing it on a monthly basis, where
Yeah.
the team decide who gets what.
Yeah.
They all get a share, and they have to give it away, and then they have to be very transparent about who they give it to. I was just wondering if anyone's done that yet.
No.
I think the thing with all of those is try them. There's going to be downsides to all of those things as well. That's general the rule is that for every good thing that you find downsides to them. So there's probably no silver bullets in any of this stuff, but if we try them and within that team it works, then we can scale it out. And that's been my experience, is that with the Kudo cards, I just started doing it myself, and people really liked it when they got it, and then that's now become something we're doing in the organisation. So you can start with yourself and do things, try it and see it, and then do it to your team, because that's the next level. You can grow it up that way. But it's a good idea. But there will be, I'm not being honest here and say that in some organisations that will be hard. So I think it's going to depend on the organisation somewhat too.
Yeah, we'll take one last question.
Great presentation online. It seems like the people that are most resistant to learning are the top executives in the organization. They're making a lot of money and they feel that they don't have much to learn. So can you give us advice? For an associate on the front line, this makes perfect sense.
Sure.
For a CEO, this is you guys go learn. I don't need to learn. So what do you do for the senior management level to get them to be humble enough to learn?
Yeah, it's a hard question. Whoa. Hope? No. It's a really good question, because I see that in, we do a lot of Agile training and consulting, and the people that want to invest the least time in that are the people the furthest up, which is always a bit puzzling in a way. But again, I think from my experience, the only way of tackling that somewhat is individually, through coaching. There are a lot of very good examples of leaders that do model what we were talking about. So, for example, the head of Microsoft, recently has been very publicly focused on, let's not be experts, but let's be good at learning, is something he's been talking about. And very much focused on things like the fixed and growth mindset, concepts that, again, most of you are familiar with. So as we start getting more leaders like that, starting to model what's good, then I think that's what will change that. So I think it's, that's what I'm seeing, is that there are some really good leaders around who do understand and make the time to learn. And as they learn, they then start showing what good looks like. And I think that's probably the hope. Or I think if they're open to coaching, so executive coaching, a good executive coach will be someone that will be encouraging them to do this. So they'll be making them aware that by not spending the time is actually inhibiting their career. So that might be your solution. Get them an executive coach who can then coach them into learning.
There's also the what's in it for me, the old mantra about what's in it for me. You could scare them and say, well, the average lifespan of companies is just 15 years, where it was 50 years a couple of years ago. So, you could do that, but that's where the coaching is going to come in. I gave training last year at Toyota in Melbourne, and the CIO attended a 3-day Agile training course. And that shows through his leadership that he believes in what they're doing. So again, so just tying in with the handy there.
Yeah, if they start reading the research, like model the way, and they start listening and thinking about it, then hopefully over time that will actually start to translate into action.
I think Warren Buffett has also got some rule. He needs to read 10,000 words a day or something like that. So there's another industry leader that really leads through that. He says he spends most of his day reading, and then the small remainder of his day is actually in doing his management stuff. So, cool. Thanks.
That's all we have time for. Thank you, Andy and Aldo.
Thank you.
Please remember to rate the sessions in the app, and lunch will be served at the level 4. And in the afternoon, we have coaching clinics and lightning talks. Please sign up at the place near to the ice cream stand, so I'm sure you can't miss that. So sign up and suggest some topics. Thank you.